What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Miami Hurricanes are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Miami did in 2024. Here were my projections and predictions last year for the Miami Hurricanes. My projection for this team was 9-3, and then so was my prediction, also at 9-3. But I came up just short of giving an accurate projection and prediction for this Miami team. This Miami team went 10-2 last year in the regular season, but they missed out on the college football playoff. Their overall record was 10-3. They lost the bowl game, of course, to Iowa State, and they lost a last close game in the regular season to Syracuse. And I think with that loss, Miami probably, messed up and probably just missed out on the college football playoff because of that loss. So it was a good season, though, for Miami. It was a little bit up and down at times, but this team was actually pretty talented last year. This was the schedule for them in 2024 last season. And again, they were 10-2 with this schedule. First off, you look at who they played in the non-conference. They played on the road at Florida, of course. That was a big non-conference game to kick off the year, but when you look back at that game, Miami actually really dominated that game. But, Florida actually ended up being a pretty big surprise team the rest of the way. Of course, Florida actually wasn't really good in the first half of the season, but second half they were a much more better team than expected. And then they also played Florida A&M, Ball State. So 2 games there that were pretty easy, and then they played South Florida. Of course, that game actually was kind of close in the first half. So this non-conference schedule, a little bit tough, but it wasn't really that tough, to be honest. And then you look at their ACC schedule. We'll start with the home schedule. They played Virginia Tech, Florida State, Duke, and Wake Forest. So they played 4 games at home last year. Pretty easy home schedule. Of course, Virginia Tech ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be. Same thing with Florida State. Duke was a huge surprise, but yeah, Wake Forest also was not really good, but Wake Forest actually ended up being close for quite a while. But then you look at their road schedule. They played on the road at California. They also played Louisville on the road, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. So they lost to Georgia Tech and Syracuse both on the road. Yeah, Georgia Tech, it was a pretty reasonable loss for them. And then Syracuse, obviously, a disappointing loss there because they were in contention to make it to the ACC championship, and they lost that game. So not a bad schedule for Miami last season. Let's now look ahead to 2025. Here is their schedule coming up for the 2025 season. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Miami plays in the non-conference for this season. So you look at their non-conference schedule. They will play 4 non-conference games. They're going to be playing Notre Dame, of course, Bethune-Cookman, then South Florida. This time they play South Florida here at home. And then they also play Florida as well. So they play South Florida and Florida, both from last year. But this time they will play both of those teams at home. Bethune-Cookman, they should be a big favorite in that game. But you got Notre Dame here, the team that was runner-ups in the national championship from last season. So yeah, that's going to be a pretty exciting game there. And when I look back at my Notre Dame projection, this game is actually going to be on the Sunday night before Labor Day. I don't know if I messed up my graphic. I can't remember. I think I did mess up my graphic back then on Notre Dame. Instead, this game will be on August 31st. It's not going to be on August 30th. This game will be on the Sunday night before Labor Day. So you look at this non-conference schedule, it could be a lot worse for them. Again, you got Notre Dame, which is not considered a Power 4 team, but they're very talented. Florida actually was a big surprise from last year, so that might be an exciting game than it was from last year. And then you got South Florida here, which is also a pretty good group of 5 teams. So the non-conference schedule is not too tough, but it could be a little bit tougher when you got Notre Dame and Florida both in there. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now move on to the home conference schedule in the ACC for the Hurricanes. They'll play 4 home games in the ACC. They'll play Louisville, Stanford, Syracuse, and NC State. So they get all these opponents at home. You got Louisville, of course, which was a really high-scoring game last year. They will play them at home on a Friday night, of course. That game will be on October the 17th, which we'll get to in just a minute. Stanford and NC State are 2 games that Miami probably should be favored in. And then you got Syracuse, of course, in a rematch from the regular season, last game of the regular season from last year. This time Miami will play them at home. So that'll be a big revenge game there for the Hurricanes. Let's now take a look at the away schedule in the ACC. They'll play 4 road games in the conference. They'll play on the road at Florida State, at SMU, at Virginia Tech, and then at Pittsburgh. So they will play all 4 of these road games on the road. Florida State obviously is a rivalry game. You never know what can happen in that game. SMU, of course, a team that made it to the ACC Championship last season. You get them on the road. You didn't play them at all in the regular season. Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh, 2 potential trap games here. Virginia Tech is a pretty tough place to play. Pittsburgh, not so tough of a place to play, but we think Pittsburgh is probably going to be a little bit better just based off of what they did last year. This is one of the more consistent teams in the ACC. So that's your away schedule. Let's now go back to the schedule here and go full game by game now for the Hurricanes. Again, they're going to start on the Sunday night before Labor Day against Notre Dame. This will be a home game for them on August 31st. Then after that, it's Bethune-Cookman here on September the 6th. Then they play South Florida also at home on September 13th. And then they'll play that rematch against Florida as well on September 20th. So instead of playing in the first game of the season from last year, this time they will play them in week 4. And they play all 4 of their non-conference games all at home in the first 4 weeks. So yeah, they'll play them all at home from August 31st all the way to September 20th. Then they open up ACC play on the road at Florida State on October 4th. And they actually get a bye week here before playing this game. So that's a pretty good spot for a bye week before playing a rivalry game against the Seminoles. And then they get another bye week here right after Florida State. So their bye weeks are kind of set up weird, but they get a bye week before playing a Friday night game against Louisville. You like to have a bye week before playing a weeknight game, especially against the Cardinals. This was a close game last year. They will play them on October 17th, and then they play Stanford at home on October 25th. Then it's on the road at SMU on November 1st. Then they'll play Syracuse at home on November 8th, back at home for NC State on November 15th, and then they play Virginia Tech on the road on November 22nd, and then they also play on the road and then close things out with Pittsburgh on November 29th. So that's your schedule for Miami for 2025. Let's now get to the projection here for this Miami team. This is the scale I've been using here for my projections for 2025 for all the teams so far. Basically, if it's a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much counted as an automatic loss for this Miami team, but you're probably not going to see any percentages here in the red, orange, or yellow because Miami might be favored in almost every single one of their games on these schedules, and then most of them could be like 50-50 games, but 20% games in the orange, that percentage basically is like where Miami is going to be a double-digit underdog by 10 to 14 points, and then your 40% games in the yellow, those are games where Miami will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown, 6-7 points, somewhere in that point range, and then your 50-50 games will of course stay in the white, games that really can go either way. 60% games in the purple, those are games where Miami will be favored by about a touchdown, 6 or 7 points, and then your 80% games in the blue, they'll be double-digit favorites in that percentage by a couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points, and then your green games are your automatic wins. So we'll start with that percentage here first at 99% in the green. I think you got 3 of them on here: Bethune-Cookman, South Florida, and Stanford. I think all these games Miami will be favored in, by a big margin, by like 17 or 20 plus points. Bethune-Cookman is definitely over that 95% mark. South Florida and Stanford, you could probably make an argument that both of those games probably should be in the blue, but I don't really think Stanford is going to be good that year. I don't really know how good they're going to be. They're still a program that's trying to figure things out. And then South Florida, that's probably closer to a 90% game than it is over 95%, just based off of what they did in the first half of last year's game. But it is at home, so Miami definitely should be clearly favored by like 17 or 20 plus points over all these teams here in the green. Again, Bethune-Cookman, USF, and Stanford, these are your automatic wins. They're not guaranteed wins, but they're counted as wins here in this projection. Now we go to the blue games. I got really one game here in the blue, and that's NC State. I think Miami will be favored by a couple of touchdowns against the Wolfpack, again by 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that point range, and somewhere in that particular range as well. Yeah, NC State, don't really know how good this team is going to be. They're just like Pittsburgh. They're a really consistent team in the ACC. It seems like they make a bowl game every year, it seems like, and they are always usually one of those consistent teams. And yeah, they can probably give Miami a little bit of a scare. If this was on the road at NC State, I would definitely put it in the purple, but Miami is clearly a more talented team, so that's definitely falls in the blue just based off of that. Then we go to the purple games, right? Miami is going to be favored by 6 or 7 points, so by about a touchdown, somewhere in that range. I got 3 of them: Florida State, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh. And all these games are on the road, so these are 3 trap games, in my opinion, for Miami. Obviously, Florida State's a rivalry. You never know what can happen. And I know this should be a 50-50 game, but based off of last year, Miami is definitely clearly the more talented team as of right now. We don't know if Florida State can turn things around, but maybe they do. You never know about Mike Norvell and this team. And then Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh, these are definitely trap games more than the Florida State games. Virginia Tech is a very tough place to play. Don't get me wrong, but, Pittsburgh, not a very tough place to play, but sometimes that could definitely be a trap road game. We saw that with Clemson last year when they played on the road at Pittsburgh. Usually that crowd is pretty hyped up, and sometimes it's not, but I think it will be pretty hyped up for this game. Let's say if Miami's probably ranked in the top 5, yeah, this crowd will definitely be fired up for this game. So, yeah, 3 of these games I feel like are trap games for Miami, but I think they'll still be favored in all of them by 6 or 7 points. So by about a touchdown, somewhere in that particular range. And then I got 50-50 games on here in the white, 5 of them: Notre Dame, Florida, Louisville, SMU, and Syracuse. All 5 of these games are 50-50 games in my opinion. Notre Dame is a pretty even matchup. You got 2 very talented teams. Look, I know Miami beat Florida last year pretty easily. It should be in the purple, but I think Florida's probably on the rise. They seem like they're heading in the right direction now with Billy Napier as the head coach for them. And then Louisville, obviously, that was a close game last year. That's pretty much the reason why it's in the white. Syracuse beat Miami. That's the reason why it's a 50-50 game from last season. And then SMU on the road, that's a tough one. That is a really big toss-up there. I think Miami is the more talented team, but SMU seems like they're a program in the ACC that really has a bright future. And I think that should be a really competitive game. So these 5 games right here, Notre Dame, Florida, Louisville, and SMU, and Syracuse, these are all games that really can go either way. So what does the projected record look like for Miami based on this schedule and how tough it is? Again, we count the green games as wins, the blue games also as wins. Then you average out these purple games at 60%, and then you average out the 50-50 games at 50%. Let's say they win 3 out of the 5 50-50 games in one of these teams, and then they probably lose 3 of them. Not 3 of them, but 2 50-50 games, and let's say they slip up in one of those purple games. That's going to give you 3 losses, and that'll give you 3 more wins in the other 50-50 games. So that's going to give you a projection of 9-3. So that is what the projected record comes out to be here for the Hurricanes, is 9-3 for 2025. Again, if you split these 50-50 games, let's say they win 3 of them, and then they probably lose 3 more games. Let's say they lose 2 50-50 games, and they could probably slip up in one of these purple games. Florida State, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh, they can definitely, slip up in one of these games right here. I mean, it's happened before. We've seen a lot of upsets in college football history. Any team can slip up anywhere. So, yeah, Miami, I think, can probably slip up in one of these 3 games in the purple, and that'll give you a 3rd loss there. The 2 50-50 games, and then one of those purple games will give you 3 losses, and that's how you give a projection of 9-3. So I think 8-4 probably the worst case scenario for Miami, and then also the best case is probably 10-2. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me know down in the comments below, and also give me your thoughts about Miami's schedule for 2025. Is it not so tough, or not? Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.